the PowerPoint presentation. Now, you will be emailed this presentation. This is being recorded as well. And then I also want to ask Scarlett in the pod just below the chat, she can go ahead and add a file share as well, and we can put it in there and you can download it, though you don't have to do that, during the webinar, but we'll just go ahead and make that available. So what we want to do today is talk about this transition to the nonprofit, as we had already mentioned, Credential Engine, and just kind of, make sure that we're on the same page as to the story of the Credential Engine, where we started, where we are now, and where we're going, and the next steps, and more specifically, how that relates to our plans for transitioning to guidance and then technical support on using the technologies related to the project. So with the nonprofit transition, on September 19th, an event was held at the museum in Washington, D.C. An announcement was made of the formation of a nonprofit called the Credential Engine, and behind the scenes things are underway to transition to that nonprofit. And what we found at that event that was attended by, well, you can see here we had an audience of more than 800 people, both live there at the event and those who participated online. And I'd like to point out that what we found was overwhelmingly the attendees agreed that there's a great value to the technologies and purpose of those technologies for the Credential Engine. So that's all going on in the background, and we want to keep reinforcing this information to make sure everyone's aware of it. Some of you may be hearing this for the third time, but we also have new individuals joining this webinar today who may not be aware of this. Now, what we also want to mention is that with the non-for-profit, as it's being set up and evolving, it will include 4 new advisory groups that are being formed. And there was an online form to make recommendations for those advisory groups. I believe the deadline for those submittals have passed, but there will be 4 advisory groups, and then we have a technical advisory committee that has been meeting for quite some time and helping with the technical aspects of this project. And that committee just stays intact and it will continue. So I wanted to mention that as well. So as we're continuing with the project, this grant-funded project that will be morphing into this nonprofit, the technology solutions remain intact. And so, again, those do not change. We have 3 core key technologies that this team has been working on. The Credential Transparency Description Language, which is the common terms for describing credentials, credentialing organizations, and quality assurance organizations and information. The voluntary web-based Credential Registry, and a prototype of a search app that demonstrates the value of these technologies. So those are the 3 things we continue to work on and co-engineer. So during the transition pilot timeline, the team will continue working with our partners, providing guidance and co-engineering. So you can see this kind of high-level timeline here. There's a lot of work and a lot of that will be happening in these time frames here. But what we want the message to be clear about is that we're continuing to work with our partners. The partners, both the partners who have selected credentials or quality assurance information to test with the registry, our interested stakeholders and technical advisory committee are essential with the ongoing work. And we want everyone to know we have every intention of keeping that up. It's been critical, and we intend to continue here. Let me just pause there for a moment and see if Bob would like to add anything to that kind of reinforcement of the message.
Yeah, no, Jeannie, that's a great overview. I just want to highlight a couple things in what you're seeing is what we are going to be starting doing also in November and into next year is also working with 2 to 3 states to actually demonstrate state applications. And you can see that where you have in November, starting in November, but it'll go forward. I just wanted to highlight that one part and also to emphasize what we will be discussing today is kind of newer activity that will start after the first of the year. But I also want to encourage, as Jeannie said, we will continue to work with partners providing guidance all through next year and after July of 2017 through the new nonprofit called Credential Engine. Thanks, Jeannie.
Thank you, Bob. Now, as we're talking about these things, again, I want to encourage everyone to feel free anytime to type in the chat. We'll pause throughout for any kind of questions and answers, and of course allow time at the end. If you put questions or comments in the chat, we'll keep track of them and do our best in the time allotted to answer all questions. And for those we can't answer, we'll send a follow-up to everyone, if we can't answer them because we run out of time, for example. So let's move on to where we started together. There are a number of, there's a lot of people participating with this webinar, and many of them kind of started at the beginning with us, but we also, it has evolved substantially over the past year, so we constantly have kind of an influx of new individuals who are participating and trying to catch up, with the information. So where did we begin? Back in January of 2016, so just this year, we recruited our first partner. I think it was Western Governor University, actually, and with the goal of up to 75 partners. And selection, each partner would select just one or a few credentials, because it's not about the quantity, it's just about getting to understand all types of credentials to design to make sure that those 3 technologies can accommodate all of those credentials, as well as emerging types of credentials. We formed our technical advisory committee, and they began meeting in November of 2015. So it's their 1 year anniversary that we actually celebrate tomorrow with the TAC. And we did it all, we came into this with an approach, and we said and continue to operate under this approach that it's requiring open licenses and conformance with World Wide Web Consortium W3C specifications for semantic metadata. And Stuart's going to talk more about this in the slides a little bit later. But here we want to introduce this because it has been a critical aspect of the design. And of course, we began at that time CoEngineering, and we started CoEngineering that credential transparency description language and the credential registry with all of our partners. And what we want to remind everyone is why we want to do this, because we're moving to a web of linked data. For those of you who have participated with partner orientation webinars, you would have seen the slide. And for those of you who are new, this is just a good context slide, because for those of us who use, for example, Google search, we know that it has come a long way, even in just the last couple of years, where we no longer just get long lists of links. As a matter of fact, most of us are probably very dissatisfied with that. We want to get better information. And so through this example, we can see how directly through the Google interface, we can put in information that is common to, finding and making a reservation at a hotel based on key points of information about hotels. So imagine in the future being able to do something similar to this with credential information. So of course it'll be a little bit different up here, but it is the same idea. We want to have metadata on the key features of credentials that will enable more people to easily connect to that information and share that information as well. So co-engineering, I had brought that up, and what we mean by that is those three technologies are not purchased products or anything like that. We've literally been working with all of our partners, all of you in this webinar, to design, develop, and implement them. So that's what we mean by the co-engineering process. And this is why it has been absolutely critical. It's because it gives us the flexibility to test ideas at work, find out what works and what doesn't, what's needed, and basically kind of, iterate and change on the fly. So how have we been doing that? We've been doing manual reviews of credential information. So actually looking at each credential that our partners have selected one by one and looking at all of the features, the information, the descriptors about those credentials and quality assurance as well. So that has evolved our schema, or the CTDL, and it's been a constant change, which has been good. It's been a necessary part of the evolution of the work. And it's really helped us develop an understanding of what's currently out there. How is credential information and related quality information currently made available to the public, and understanding that structured and unstructured data formats that are out there now. And what we're seeing, for example, in regards to competency descriptions that are important feature or benefit that we would want people to easily connect to as information about credentials, are largely in PDF documents. So as an example, so we see a lot of PDF documents, of course, a lot of web pages, and then of course, we're seeing database-driven, web applications as well. So we're taking the time to really look at all of this type of information. So when we're looking at this information, we have a process in place that for reviewing it, doing that analytical review and mapping of the current information and what it looks like now on the web to the CTDL. And we do that through this thing that we call the CTDL Editor. And what that's doing is converting the partner information to the metadata infrastructure and then publishing it to the sandbox for the Credential Engine registry. So these three things all have been happening, iterating, changing, evolving. But there is a Credential Engine registry sandbox, and for those of you who have selected a credential and are on the webinar and have already been given access, you can see that what the information looks like, what it means to now have structured information that then you're looking at through an app. So it's our prototype search app for demonstrating just basic search right now. And this is our loop. So we have our loop, and we're working with our partners, we're getting our feedback, and then we make updates. So we've been looping through this process right here, and it's been arduous but effective. So when we're talking about looping through this process with our technical advisory committee and now with our partners, this is our snapshot today. We have 66 credential organization partners, and 4 of them are quality assurance partners. And this is kind of the breakdown of the types of credentials. What we want to do is have test credentials across all the different types of credentials, those that are well established, degrees, to newer types of credentials such as badges, and then of course other kinds such as certificates and certifications. And we want to design this to allow for, of course, emerging credentials as well. But this is a snapshot of where we are now. And as I've said, this is not about the quantity of the credentials, because there's really a lot to look at. It's been, quite arduous to look at all this credential information and map and remap and, tweak the CTDL. So this is where we are. Now, So let me pause there a moment before we talk about what's evolved, because a lot has happened in 1 year. So we have an announcement to make today and more to talk about where we've evolved. But let me see if anybody has any questions or comments, and also see if either Bob or Stuart want to comment on anything that we've covered so far. Oh, it's too quiet. I love comments and feedback. Let us know in the chat. Go ahead and type something in there. Let us know if we're good to go. And any questions, we definitely want to hear. We want you to know that we want your feedback. Okay. Then I'll just keep on going, and if anything pops in, we'll take a pause and answer any questions or comments. So what's evolved is the credential transparency description language has evolved substantially to the point that we had notified our technical advisory committee during our last meeting last month. We meet every month, that the CTDL release is live today, and so hence it is. One of our technical team is working on just some of the things like putting the pages on our site. If the page isn't up yet, it will be today. And you can check it later, and there's a URL to the page there. And what that means is that the stable portions of the CTDL can be safely used by others. So other application developers, platform systems can begin to use the CTDL. And just to give you an extent of it, because it is technical, it's the metadata infrastructure, though if you go look at this URL, you would see that it's got a human readable view, and there's also the machine readable portions of it. So I do encourage you to take a look at it if you're interested. And this kind of gives you an idea of the scope here. So you may not know what all these things mean, and that's fine. But I think, it portrays that there's a lot of descriptors about credentials, and the progress has been significant enough to warrant having these descriptors here that are all visible, and if the page is up right now. If it's not, again, it will be today, to give you an idea of the scope of that release. And when we get to Stuart's part on the going forward with developing a roadmap, I'll touch on that some more. But again, I want to pause here, because this has really been a lot of work, and I want to make sure people don't have questions about that, and also see if Stuart or Bob want to talk at all about the CTDL release today.
Well, no, Judy, I just want to acknowledge that this is a great development today, and it really has been a product of working with all of our pilot sites, and we've learned so much from how you all are working with your credentials. I want to thank the pilot sites for all, and also the Technical Advisory Committee, which has made unbelievable inputs. Through this co-engineering process with the pilot sites and Technical Advisory Committee, we have learned so much, and I think that's reflected in the release today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's been a critical part of the process, that feedback process. Somebody put a comment that the site is down. The website should not be down. That page may not be up, but do I have a typo in there or something? Okay, yeah, thanks, Jeff. The site should definitely be up, but Scarlett is making sure a programmer is aware that people are probably trying to access that link. Now, again, if you don't see the page, no worries, you will see it today. It is live. It's just a matter of exposing the page.
And Jean, I would have a few comments about it, so people know what it is that they're looking at. As you can see from the number of classes and properties and vocabularies, 20 control vocabularies with a span of 115 concepts across those 20 vocabularies. So the CTDL is significant in size. And Jean mentioned that it is still evolving, and that is the case. So the release today has two aspects to it. there are what we call stable, and things that are unstable because we're still interacting with segments of the community about to refine the properties and classes within their context. So when you look at the tables of those 68 classes and 228 properties, you'll note that there's a field that says whether it's stable or unstable. And this release will be followed by a number of other releases over which those that are marked unstable will become stable through modification, whatever has to happen with them. So we will be going through a cycle over the next few months of probably, although we're coming into the holidays, almost a monthly release as we polish off those areas that are marked as unstable in the viewer. So that's it, Jane.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so we're not saying it's done, but we're saying it's substantial, it's usable and useful, but we definitely have plans for some additions, changes to anything flagged as unstable, and additional work that will be coming along as well, and we'll be keeping you informed, all of our partners informed about that, and providing opportunities as we have along for interested persons to participate with that evolving work.
Hey, Jeannie, this is Bob. We had a question from Alex
Yes,
about how the model maps to other work, and we may want to mention how we worked with the assessment group to help map across the work of others.
Well, let me jump in first and talk a little bit about what Alex is asking. Alex, we're working with an RDF model. So in many cases, we're looking at least at the model level differences between the context such as IMS, which has fingers into linked data and RDF, but it's not quite there. So we have associations with everybody. We've got people on the TAC from IMS, and I'm not sure whether we have PESC. I'm not sure, but our goal is to make sure that we are, in quotes, as mappable to these other major schemas and so forth that impact this space are in it. So yeah, we're doing our best to, for example, to communicate with the badging community, and the badging community has deep roots now in IMS and so forth. So yeah, we're doing our best because we do not want to reinvent where there's good stuff, where there are models that comport and can be mapped into an RDF model. We don't want to reinvent, and we clearly want to be as supportive as we can in terms of how we interact. So we're not trying to do it on our own. We are interacting.
Yeah, for sure, Stuart. Thanks for those details. The Technical Advisory Committee includes representatives from IMS Global and many other organizations and the badging community, and we still welcome participation with that. It is not a closed group. So if after hearing this presentation today, anybody's interested in joining the Technical Advisory Committee, you're welcome to let us know. You can put that in the chat, and we'll follow up with you. We have our monthly Technical Advisory Committee meeting tomorrow. So another thing
and the committee is, just to give you a sense of the scale, the committee is big for a committee, but it has over 60 representatives that are coming from all over, from both the content side, the credentialing side, and those interests that are on the committee. But then we've tried to reach out, Alex, to these other groups and actually, suck them into the TAC as participants.
Yeah, definitely. So we still have a more the merrier attitude. So the Credential Engine Registry, it also has evolved. It is a sandbox environment, so it's really important to know that all of this is a pilot, all of this is a test right now. As noted earlier in the presentation, the intent is to bring it to scale under the nonprofit, and plans are evolving for that. But it does exist. We are testing it. It uses a CTDL schema to validate, and what that means is that it will be updated to use the most current schema released today as an example, so it can easily evolve as well. And I see Steve Mitchell, who is working on the Credential Engine Registry, is in the webinar as well, and he may want to make a comment on that. But one of the key pieces of information concerning the registry that's important is the flexibility of it to basically update the schema on the fly as it's evolving and tested. So that's been essential, and it already provides APIs or a means to push data in and get data out. So we're testing all of that. And another thing that we thought would be of interest is that it backs up to Internet Archive, and what this does is provide a permanent record of credentials over time. And with that said, Steve, if you have audio and you want to add just a little bit of info to what I just said, that would be great.
Sure. I mean, that's a pretty good summary. We're providing mechanisms to allow the community to manage their own schema. So as the schema get more complex, there will be sort of community-based administrators to manage that. So that's a new feature there. The APIs for getting data out will be evolving as the relationships between the entities grows in complexity. There'll probably be some sort of graph-based extractions for getting more complex relationships out of the data. But then, as with the Internet Archive, you can always go back and load these data sets into alternative systems if you want to manage the data in your own way in another environment.
Thank you. Yeah, so there's been a lot of work done to get that far, and to be able to test that registry with the evolving schema has been so essential to the process. And the other technology has clearly evolved as well, and it's a slow but sure process with partner review. So again, I have to tell partners, hang in there. For those of you who are like, when are you going to get back to us? We promise that we are not ignoring you at all. It's just been a lot of work. It just has. It's been a very arduous process. And actually, now that we have this release, it's going to help a lot with us being able to get back to all of our partners. It impacts this. So every time we're changing something with the CTDL, it's changing something with the registry, it's changing something with the editor, and so forth. So another huge part of that release is that additional stability of such a huge hunk of the descriptors, so we can double back on this aspect of it. So more to come in the next couple of months. We should have this good to go. However, knowing that it's still, the CTDL will be evolving, but we'll have this huge swath of stability. So all right, so let me stop there again, and we're going to move on to where we're going, and we're going to get into how we're planning to do the guidance that will then turn into technical assistance a little bit later. Any questions or comments? Anything else that Bob or Steve or Stuart that you would like to add to what we just covered?
I'm fine. No.
Okay. I shall continue. So we're and now notice I'm calling it CE, because we'll be, as we noted earlier, kind of morphing into the Credential Engine. And so where we're going now. So now that we have this huge swath of stability, we will still, as we had mentioned, there are still some areas that we're going to be working on, and then we will have additional releases. But we have a good sense of those areas, and a plan for further developing them with partners and experts in those areas. And we're going to start moving over to developing guidance roadmaps. for partners and note with partners. So it kind of goes back to that whole notion of co-engineering. We don't want to do any of this with us just saying, well, we think partners need this, you know, and then just putting it out there. So we want to continue to work with our partners, as we said earlier. And we also, for those of you who have joined this webinar and you're in process of joining the partnership, we have this thing that we call an acknowledgement form or acknowledgement agreement, and it's simply a piece of paper that you sign and says, I acknowledge the project and we agree to participate in it. So some of you have that in process. And what we want you to know is if anyone who's in process of joining, and if it takes you longer, you know, past December 31st, no worries. We understand that the internal processes can take a while, so we want to encourage that. Don't stop your process. You know, keep whatever you need to do internally going to join the partnership. But we do have to kind of have a cutoff point for pilot partners and, you know, transition to something, you know, more permanent. But we want to continue to work with all of our pilot partners and provide guidance. And we've always called them a guidance roadmap. So anyone who sat in an orientation webinar saw slides about guidance roadmaps. And as promised, you will receive them. And what we want to talk about in that guidance and roadmaps is how you can continue with our support, of course, initially, and guidance, and then ongoing, how you can put your information on the open web, make it available, I should say, through the open web, so the Credential Engine Registry can get data, or so you can push data, or you can mark up a website, for example. So that's the kind of guidance that we're talking about here. And this is another slide that we've always included in the orientation as a good reminder that the roadmap is to open link structured data. And this graphic here is loosely based on the 5-star linked data, not a system, but the kind of 5-star rating of whether or not you've met the goals of linked data. So it's loosely based on it, though it's 5 stars. And basically what we want to do is start here with raising the awareness, and we want to get to here where all of the partners in any kind of credential or quality assurance organization can in fact put open and linked data that is structured and useful on the web. So that's the goal. And I am going to pass the baton over to Stuart to talk a little bit more about what that means and what that could look like.
Okay. Some of you that I see on the session were on a session the other day in which I went over this slide or a variation of this slide, and so I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat myself, but this is a slide from a text, 2010 text, that basically looks at what our next challenge is going to be. And that's the mapping out of existing data from stores for credential holders or for credential providers, and mapping it into the credential description language, credential transparency description language that we have been evolving and that we've been developing. So part of the roadmap and the strategy of developing guidelines is to help partners with this path from their current data, however stored, in whatever form. How does that progress down through a mapping to the credential CTDL language, and then making it available on the web? So what we basically see is that this process is one, both technical and analytical. It's analytical in that we're asking we will be asking people who have credentials that they want to expose and make part of this emerging fabric that is through the Credential Engine and on the open web, is how to do the analytics, the analysis, in order to map their existing data onto the CTDL. The assumption here is that there's no request for people to technically do anything with their existing stores. This whole thing does not ask anybody to throw out anything that they're doing. It's to build a layer, which is sort of the bottom part of this image. Build a layer on top of your existing stores where you have your descriptions of credentials and so forth, and to make them available for on the open web for linking and for harvesting through the push-pull mechanisms that were being talked about earlier. So there's two pieces. There's that analytic piece, and then of course there's the bits and bytes piece of how you take data that is in one form and map it out to a different language than it is encoded in. And this image basically divides that data into two kinds that don't have really clean borders between them, but two kinds of data: structured data and text. Structured data being everything from having your data stored in CDS or Excel files through XML and so forth, structured data behind an API, or stored in a relational database, or some combination of those two. That structured data basically means that behind the scene, your data is already described in a way that those descriptions could be mapped to the CTDL. Then there's the text side, and that's and by text, basically mean PDFs and so forth, where the text is encoded technically, but there is no and there is inherent structure that a human can see by looking at the PDF, but is not expressed in machine form. In other words, a machine would just see text. So we know that the data people have from what we've looked at fall into those two camps: structured data that's already been described based on attributes stored in some sort of a system, to those that basically publish a PDF and will now want to be able to extract that structured data from the PDF. So if we look at, what this basically says, this whole diagram, is that you're starting with your data in one of those forms. With those on the text end, there's some data preparation, but then ultimately there is a translation from your current data into the credential transparency description language. At which point, which is in RDF, it is a model based on what the W3C feels necessary to support the semantic web and linked data, and therefore, when you map from your current data structures into the CTDL, it is then linked data ready. And the next thing then is to expose it so that that others can link to your data, but that applications like the Credential Registry can, in fact, harvest the data. So what we would be doing over the next couple of months, we've got the holidays and everything coming up, but is beginning to look at the development of roadmap guidance to assist along these pathways from structured data out to having it ready and available for ingest harvesting into the CER, into the CER. So that development, as Jean said, will be done in a cooperative way. with partners, piloting both the guidance and the processes. So we will even be, we're, as Jean said, we're co-engineering the guidance as we develop as it develops and gets tested. So the goal then is, in the end, to have all of the partners and people with their credential related data structured to be able to expose it on the web. So one, it's the guidance around both of those processes. Guidance around how do I analyze my credentials in relationship to the CTDL? How do I map it out to the CTDL? And then guidance for the technical folk who actually have to do the bits and bytes and any programmatic stuff in order to bring this into fruition. Again, emphasizing that there is no requirement here that anything be, in quotes, changed at the data storage level or current applications. So the CTDL and this whole piece is something that's layered on top. It doesn't demand changes within. So we will be developing that kind of guidance over the coming months, working again with partners. And Jean, can you flip to the next page? I don't seem to have control.
I will flip to the next page. We do have a question from Jose. Could metadata be used?
Obviously, yes. If you've got structure, if you've got structured metadata already, then you're ready to map. You would fall into the structured side of the. So sure. It would go through the same sort of analytic process though as you would if that metadata were stored in a relational database or were represented as in an XML document, in an XML document tree where you already have it structured. Of course. So the CTDL itself is agnostic as to how your original metadata is structured or stored. The only thing it is concerned with is your mapping out to it, and then having technical mechanisms to do that mapping and final exposing. And so I hope, Jose, that sort of answers it. You can tell me if it didn't. Throw it into the chat there. There are tools already, publicly available tools for working on various ends of that spectrum from text to structured data that can help. For example, open applications like OpenRefine and LoadRefine. OpenRefine was originally Google Refine. Provides a mechanism, for example, for mapping from a spreadsheet from permanent spreadsheet, like a spreadsheet, mapping out to RDF data structures. So there are applications that you can deploy that can automate some of that. D2R server is in the previous image would be sitting at the bottom below, for example, the APIs, and that server is equipped is designed to handle the mapping from your conventional data from your database into RDF and can be tuned to, in quotes, speak CTDL. So you can map. So there are all kinds of applications, publicly available, free applications that can assist you or your technical folk in making that final synapse of the mapping it out. And things like D2R server actually sit there. It's an RDF, you have a fully implemented server RDF making your data available. So there are ways, and we will work these kinds of processes into the roadmap guidance as well. And it says and more. There are more. I mean, this is just a suggestive, list of the kinds of openly available tools for doing some of that technical stuff. So Jean, I think that's it, unless you can think of something more I need to address.
I think that's good. The only other point I would make up here, where we talk about that, the analytical and technical kind of co-work there, is that one of the things that we've done with all of our partners who have joined to, and identified credentials, is they have identified both, program experts, people that know the credential, and the technical expert. So we have, that will be here important, to have that joint participation.
Well, and I would also add that the partners that already have credentials in process now are actually having that analytic piece done. It's actually happening. The analysis, in order for it to go into the credential engines and so forth, that mapping between what they have and what and that representation is part of the support that they're currently getting. And the only reason we raise it here is to emphasize that is an analytic process. It's a process of looking at what your credential says and translating what it says into the language of CTDL, mapping it in.
Yeah, we did get a couple of questions in, or at least one from Jeff here. Can you see that question? He's asking, could an institution deep link to any level of detail for a specific entry in the registry, such as a particular competency?
If you're asking whether you would be able to, yes, I believe yes. And Steve, you jump in too, please. But of course, if you're on the outside and you have the URI of Credential A in the registry, you can access that credential directly, or will be able to access it directly. Do I misspeak, Steve?
Yeah. Well, I mean, accessing a component like a competency is an attribute of a credential in the registry. We're dealing with an entity model.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't. I'm sorry, and I misread. I read it as the credential. Sorry.
Right. So in a full linked data RDF world, as Stuart has described, any entity can link to any other entity, right? It's a fully open graph, and we've elected, for simplicity of use, for developer use and integration, those sorts of things, to work on an entity model which talks about things like credentials and organizations, and we also include things like relationships between entities that can be referenced as first-class citizens. But a competency in the registry isn't its own entity. Does that sound right, Stuart?
Well, let me elaborate on that. One of the goals, and in fact, the figure that we were just looking at, one of the goals is that that we get as many of the competency frameworks as are necessary to express the data, to also get those into machine form. And in fact, we have it is not directly the CTDL, but we are using a Credential Engine profile of the Achievement Standards Network vocabulary for describing competencies in machine form, so that ultimately you could link to a specific competency within a specific competency framework that is linked to a specific credential. So ultimately, for example, in the open web, one would be able to access a specific competency in specific competency, say in DPQ, and be able to query what credentials have been mapped to this node in DPQ and get all of the credentials using linked data, get all of the credentials that have themselves mapped to that node in DPQ. So the answer ultimately is yes in an open linked data environment. The infrastructure in the data will be present, because you'll have your competency described in such a way that you can link to it. You have your credential described in such a way that you can link to it. And the credential links to the competency, so you could in a browsing environment literally follow your nose. From a node in the DPQ, you could follow your nose out to the credentials inside it, and so forth. So the data infrastructure for doing that is built into the CTDL, and companion vocabularies for describing other things. The ASN for describing competency frameworks. We're currently looking at schema course for describing courses. So other communities that have tackled some of these necessary components and the description of these necessary components, we're trying our best to not reinvent those within the CTDL, but to rely on these other vocabularies. But once they're all in place, then Jeff, yes. Ultimately, the answer is yes. As linked data, the data, well, it'll be provided forth in the data.
Yes, and that and that's a perfect segue to our next steps and what we'd like to do to kind of co-engineer this guidance, because what we're seeing in particular, since you brought up competencies, Jeff, thank you, is that mainly either the competency statements are in a PDF form, or they just might be on a web page, or just not there at all. And just to clarify that, we're also talking about learning outcomes. We use the word competency a lot, but competency is learning outcomes as well. And so what we're having to do is basically manually break those out, atomize them, as Stuart has talked about in other webinars and upcoming webinars on this subject that are being scheduled. So watch for those and register. And that'll be a part of the work with our next step. So what we're asking for as a next step with our partners is that we're going to do a webinar on January 19th, and Scarlett will have that registration up. If it's not already up, it will be emailed to everyone who registered and participated with this webinar today. So by the way, if you surrogated for someone and we don't have your email address, put it in the chat so we can get you that info. And what we want to do is cover the expectations for what partners will do and get to co-engineer and test guidance tools. And we want to do this with a subset of our partners. So to clarify, every partner will, in the end, get a guide, a roadmap guide. But we need a subset of partners who are willing to work with us and basically help test and implement guidance. And that would mean, going back to that diagram that Stuart was talking about, mapping what your existing technologies are and formats of those to a means to achieve the very bottom of that chart, and that's that open link data. So we need to be able to do that. We have to work directly with our partners, and there has to be a willingness, to do that. So we're asking for 6 to 10 partners. We want, anyone who may be interested in that or wants to know about it to join this webinar, and we'll get more into what that will entail, and then we're going to ask people to sign up, and then we'll start in February. And then we'll kick off our guidance webinar in February. We'll be setting up, collaboration space. We'll do some technical assistance webinars, because there will be a lot of back and forth needed in this area here. And then we're going to ask those partners that participate with that to also participate with our technical advisory committee if they're not already, because that'll be on the agenda. The TAC will be very interested in that work. And so we can show progress, demonstrate, garner feedback, And of course, we'll continue to provide guidance based on the input. So that's our next step. We want to encourage as much participation as possible. So whether or not you're thinking, yeah, we definitely want to be one of those 6 to 10 or not, we want to encourage everyone to participate with that webinar. So let me stop there and see, Bob or Stuart, if you want to add anything to this next step slide.
Not me, Gene. I'm fine.
No, that's a great summary, Gene, but just to emphasize that we will continue to work with partners that have signed an acknowledgement form on an individual basis who wants to do 1 to 2 credentials and keep going on that just to learn more. But then of all those people who do that, we'd like to get 6 to 10 partners. So we would urge you to participate in the 19th webinar. If nothing else, just to learn more, another deeper understanding of the guidelines themselves and what we're asking to be piloted. That would be great.
Thank you. All right, we've got 2 minutes left according to my clock. Any other questions, comments, thoughts? See some typing in the chat. I'm not sure that the webinar registration is set up. I'm going to check with Scarlett on that right afterwards, and if not, we're going to make sure that gets emailed to you today. If you did not register for this webinar, if we don't have your email address, just make sure we have it. Scarlett can maybe put her email address in here if you'd rather not put it in the chat, so then you can email Scarlett. So we can make sure we can get registration going. As we mentioned, we have a technical advisory committee meeting tomorrow. Also, if you're not already a part of that or you haven't registered for that, there's a registration open now for that for sure. I'm going to ask Scarlett to put that registration link in there in case anyone's interested. So tomorrow will be a deep dive into that CTDL release that we talked about, and it's for our technical advisory committee and other interested stakeholders. So it's an open session. So let's make sure we get that link in there, Scarlett, as well, so people can register for that. And we want to thank all of you. We had a really great turnout today. Want to thank all of you for your time, and we totally appreciate your participation and interest. Thank you.